He had the kind of smile that disarmed you before you even realized you were in danger. That smile was the sharpest weapon in his arsenal, polished and practiced through years of manipulation. His name was whispered in private chats, in support groups, in the corners of darkened cafes where women leaned across tables, their eyes filled with the same fury and humiliation. They all knew him, not by the name he gave them, but by the trail of deceit he left behind. To the world, he was a smooth-talking businessman, a man of wealth and influence, a dreamer who swept women off their feet with promises of forever. To them, he was a thief of more than just money. He had stolen trust, dignity, and sometimes the very core of who they believed they were. For years, his games had gone unpunished. Women from different cities, different countries even, woke up to the same realization: the man they loved wasn't real. His stories were elaborate, rehearsed until every detail seemed flawless. He spoke of danger, of enemies that threatened him, of urgent loans that needed to be taken in their names for his protection. The women, blinded by affection and hope, complied, never suspecting they were part of an endless cycle that funded his lavish life. He flew across countries in private jets, dressed in designer suits, ate in restaurants that required reservations months in advance, and posted photographs that told the story of success. It wasn't his success, it was theirs, drained from their accounts, charged to their futures. But a man who builds an empire on lies forgets that lies always rot from the inside out. One by one, his victims began to find each other. It started with a post on a forum, then a shared news article, and soon messages began to fly across time zones. Strangers became sisters in arms, bound not by friendship, but by a shared wound that refused to heal. Each of them carried their scars differently, some with anger, others with despair, some with a quiet resolve that hardened with every passing day. They shared their stories, piecing together his patterns, comparing the details that matched like puzzle pieces. His charm, once irresistible, now looked like the face of a predator they had finally unmasked. The first taste of vengeance was small, but it was enough to ignite something powerful. They began to coordinate, using the very tools he had once used to manipulate them. A fake profile here, a carefully crafted message there. Where he had once played the role of hunter, they now became the architects of his downfall. They created a version of themselves he could not resist, wealthy, gullible, everything he searched for. But beneath the polished photos and carefully worded conversations, a trap was being laid with patience he had never learned to respect. The con man found himself entangled, thinking he had stumbled upon yet another victim to fund his extravagant life. He spoke the same lines, repeated the same stories, unaware that every word was being documented, every move watched. The women, though scattered across continents, worked as a single unit. They fed him hope, then pulled it away, only to feed it again. He grew desperate, his arrogance blinding him to the possibility that he was no longer in control. Soon, his accounts began to drain. The women, through clever schemes and meticulous planning, turned his tactics back on him. They baited him into investments that never existed, tricked him into transferring funds for promises that would never be fulfilled. Piece by piece, the empire he had stolen crumbled, not by chance, but by the very hands of those he had wronged. But revenge wasn't just about the money. It was about exposure. The women pooled their evidence, every receipt, every flight ticket, every screenshot of his honeyed lies. They found journalists eager for the story, lawyers hungry for justice, and a public that loved nothing more than to see a villain brought low. His face, once framed in luxury and allure, was plastered across screens and headlines, not as a prince of wealth, but as a parasite feeding on the hearts of women who had dared to believe in him. The man who had once walked into the world with his head high now found himself ducking into shadows, his name a curse on the lips of those who once adored him. Friendships collapsed, doors closed, banks froze his accounts, and every city he entered seemed to whisper his crimes back at him. Where he once wielded power, now he carried the weight of disgrace. For the women, the victory was not sweet in the way they once imagined. Revenge rarely tastes the way you dream it will. But it was justice, and justice carried a different kind of satisfaction. They had not only taken back what he had stolen, they had taken his freedom to ever do it again. His legend ended not with a con but with the truth, sharpened and delivered by those who had once been his victims. And so the story of the swindler was rewritten, not as a tale of his cleverness, but as a testament to the strength of those he underestimated. The women who once wept in silence now stood together, their vengeance complete, their voices loud enough to drown out the lies that had bound them. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he was smarter than everyone else. But in the end, the greatest con was his own delusion that he could break people and walk away unscathed. They were his victims once. Now, they were his executioners. The memory of him lingered like smoke, clinging to their lives long after they had escaped his grasp. Some of the women carried debt so crushing it had warped their futures. Others bore scars invisible but no less real. The distrust of new love, the shame of being deceived, the anger that woke them in the dead of night. But what united them now was no longer just the wound. It was the fire that wound had lit. They refused to let him become another untouchable ghost who vanished into new disguises. Every detail of his life became their weapon. They learned his habits, tracked his movements, and intercepted the stories he spun for his next victims. One woman discovered the restaurant he frequented in a foreign city. Another recognized the alias he was using on a dating app. They shared screenshots like war trophies, each one tightening the net around him. What once felt like isolation now became a sisterhood, a resistance army stitched together from broken pieces that, when joined, formed something unbreakable. He never realized how thoroughly they had studied him. His words, once intoxicating, now revealed patterns, stock phrases, recycled anecdotes, and emotional triggers. To the women, his script was as transparent as glass. They knew when he would ask for money, how he would stage his fake emergencies, when he would vanish and resurface with excuses about danger and betrayal. What had once ensnared them now became their guidebook for tearing him down. Some of them infiltrated his world not as lovers, but as observers, blending in just enough to earn his trust before feeding back every detail to the group. Others pursued legal routes, pressing charges, filing reports, submitting evidence until the pile grew so heavy it could no longer be ignored. He was not clever enough to notice the storm gathering around him, too blinded by his arrogance and the belief that women would always remain silent, ashamed, and scattered. But this time was different. This time, the women didn't hide. They confronted him in the very arenas he had thrived: the world of social media, the glossy pages of magazines, the endless scroll of headlines. Where he had once crafted an image of untouchable wealth, they tore it apart with brutal honesty. They posted his lies, his scams, his stolen promises. Strangers from around the world began to see him not as a mysterious tycoon, but as a predator in designer shoes. His downfall wasn't sudden, it was suffocating. Banks flagged his accounts, border authorities began questioning his papers, and hotels closed their doors. His name was no longer an invitation, but a warning. He tried to rebuild, to slip into another persona, but his victims were relentless. They hunted every false identity, exposed every new mask. The women who had once believed they were powerless now wielded more strength than he had ever imagined. And when he finally fell, it wasn't with the drama he had once orchestrated. There were no private jets, no expensive lawyers to shield him, no glamorous life to retreat into. His arrest was quiet, humiliating, and inevitable. The world didn't mourn his downfall, it celebrated it. The women who had once been seen as naive now stood as warriors, their vengeance a lesson written in fire across the very stage he had built for himself. But perhaps the truest revenge was not the headlines or the prison bars that awaited him. It was the fact that his legacy would never be his own. His name was chained forever to the voices of those who exposed him, their story louder and stronger than any lie he could spin. The con man who once thrived on illusion was finally stripped bare, and in that exposure, he lost the only thing he had ever truly possessed: control. And for the women, the silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was peace, a peace earned through pain, perseverance, and vengeance that had finally run its course.